All right. Um, that
What
said,
I will say is fantastic work with the reportings with the ASMR news. It's a pleasure to see them happen. And congrats on beating Ark to the punchline on multiple occasions.
It was not easy. I'll tell you that much.
Okay, I think that's a good enough transition as we can. Thank you, Dutch, for sharing your story and making all this stuff happen. You're free to hang out and continue to chat, obviously.
Yep, yep.
Okay, so should I call you Thaddeus, Riley? What name are we going to go with, right?
You can just go with Riley.
Riley. Okay. So you are a pretty avid fan of the Caldari. That
That would be correct.
fairly safe to say. And you almost backdoored yourself into this news story, right? You weren't actively hunting for something like this. You were already starting your news post before Athounon kicked off. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I had already started doing some news things, but Athounon offered an opportunity to escalate that into like
Right.
videos and stuff.
So like before that, you were reporting things like, oh, a carrier got caught or something like between the Galente and Caldari forces. You were just reporting like how the fighting was going on between the faction warfare groups. And then suddenly, as if like manna from heaven or something, it gets a report that there's this strange structure decloaking in the system of Athounon.
Yeah, I was covering a lot of the existing war fronts and battles and sieges that were occurring as the Caldari were pulling back war zone control from the Galente,
Right.
and some other things like anything that would pop up that Scope had that would be prominent, like the Union Day speeches type things and the FanFest speech that Akamada Saraki did.
Right. Okay, yeah. But then, so were you tracking the whole like Triglavian aspect of Athounon? You had no Athounon was Athounon on your radar at all prior to structure decline?
It was a little bit because, like you said, there are Caldari aligned, Trig also aligned group that was operating there, and they had been fighting with local Galente groups to retake their area, their little pipeline from Athounon through Merkham Messier and Richard, and they had killed um, a Galente Thanatos already there before
Right.
all this started happening. So it was on the radar, and I was talking with them.
Wait, so the carrier that I referred to earlier was also in Athounon, or was it part of the same kind of effort, just not necessarily?
So before the Edencom structure and all of that, a pole dancer pilot flew their carrier into Athounon, trying to shut down their attempts to retake the pipeline.
Okay, so this
And
was actually all the same story, basically.
and they triggered the Triglavian disintegrator war posts on the carrier, and it got blobbed to death by Trigs and them.
Amazing. That's that's a bad idea. Um, yeah, there are several systems in the war zone that are minor victories, especially Triglavian minor victories. And the interesting piece about that is that a lot of the guys in faction warfare just simply haven't gone through the effort to fix their standings. It is a piece of the geography that there are some people that can really leverage, and there are other people that are greatly imperiled by, which makes these really interesting pockets of, while not safety, at least some form of cover within these low sec territories. So, of course, like a pro Caldari, pro Triglavian force would find a system like Athounon to be very tempting. And I think there's even like another minor victory within a couple of jumps of there. So it's a very appealing place for Triglavians.
I'm not sure there's a Triglavian minor victory a few jumps away. There might be, but there is a Edencom minor victory within the same constellation.
Okay, I know that there's at least one place where there's like two Triglavian minor victories. And
Yeah, that would be over in Black Rise, where the
okay,
you often have them gate camping people passing through.
yeah, those are the ones I like to poke into for exactly the reasons outlined before. All right, so the day comes that the structure begins decloaking. Now, on day one, it starts cloaking and decloaking pretty randomly. There's Caldari forces on field. Nobody really knew what was happening until at least day 2.
So there weren't Kaldari forces necessarily on the field until the FanFest update. So, you have the Kaldari start deploying right about a month after FanFest to equalize between the Galente diamonds that had already started appearing. And that
Right.
is around the same day. I think it's like a day after the income structure started to cloak and decloak. So it happened really quickly.
I am pretty sure on day 1 there's at least some Caldari on field. If I remember correctly, they weren't on top of the structure, but they were like on grid with the structure. Can't remember. But I remember like sneaking in there, and the people that had eyes on there was a fleet to end with. But maybe it wasn't as organized. They certainly weren't dropping anything. So I don't know. Either way, so by day 2, when did we get the orders?
So the orders came probably a week after it first appeared. I think I can pull up the exact date. Let me just look around real quick.
And pull up the.
It is key to note that the Kaldari received theirs at least a day before the Galente received theirs.
That's true. Because it was owned by the Caldari, so it was, secure and hold. Whereas the Galente one was fake.
Yeah, they issued the orders right around when the Kaldari group living there had taken half the constellation. So it was a even split, just about half and half of the constellation per side.
There we go. So here's the Caldari orders, and it's dated June 20th.
1630 Eve
Yeah,
time.
16. Yep. And it's saying highest priority to secure the Certitude constellation from enemy counteroffensive. Control of Athounon Richard Pocket essential to Caldari state interests. Revised security and regiment protocols for Athounon 5 orbital perimeter as follows. Unauthorized craft in Athounon 5 orbital perimeter are designated kill on site. Authorized corporations, Athounon 5 orbital perimeter, Caldari Navy, State Protectorate. Repeat. Unauthorized craft in Athounon 5 orbital perimeter are designated kill on site. Repeat. Control of Athounon Richard Pocket essential to Caldari state interests. These orders supersede all cooperation protocols re Concord and Edencom. On behalf of the Caldari State Chief Executive Panel, Brigadier General Heike Torrigo, Guards Executive Operations Division, Immortal. I'm not even going to try. Nope, we're done. Eschaton Caldari Navy. Yeah. So what's noteworthy about this is that this is literally saying even Concord and Edencom are kill on sight on grid, right?
Correct.
This was the very first. This is diplomatic ties failing completely. So just prior to this, during the lead up to the Easter event, we had it being exposed that there's the Garistas person who stole the information about like the capital construction, which was the main part of the Easter event. But then there's this other character, Leopold, who was basically a double agent working for the Death List, and he was a senatorial assistant that had been working in the Galente Senate for like half a decade or more. And there's evidence that he's done things for the Death List prior, but the point is that the Caldari and the Gallente were working together towards a peaceful resolution, in particular around the system of Intaki. And they were getting pretty darn close. There was a delegation of the Gallente that were in Caldari space, including going to Jita, where they were trying to hammer out the details of it. In the midst of all of that, it is revealed that one of the members of that delegational party was a spy, was this Leopold guy. And obviously all diplomacy from that point has basically been collapsing. It's been super tense on Intaki. But then out of kind of almost out of nowhere, a lot of people, except for the people that were paying specific attention to this area, this happens. And this is pretty much the first major catalyst that has led us down the road towards war that we are clearly on. So, okay. How long after this stuff happened did we start recovering things from the wreck?
I'm pretty sure it was almost immediate. It was a couple of days or at most. The time frame for everything going on through this period was very tight.
Right.
It was
Yeah,
very
so
fast.
you can see that this one's dated 20th, this one's dated the 21st. It was really happening, bam, bam, bam. And I'm pretty sure that by the time that the Gallente announcement came out, we were getting the drop. So
Yeah, more than likely.
So the first set of drops were the soldiers going through the hallway, right?
Yeah, it looked like it was some sort of corridor.
Okay. And you only got parts for that hallway, correct?
Yeah, so the first week or so, it was just the hallway. It wasn't
Okay.
until we had released the footage that was mostly complete, and then the full complete one, that we started to see the second set drop.
And so the second set, which was them going into the command room, that dropped as well.
Yeah, at
correct?
that point, the command room footage was dropping alongside the hallway footage. So
Okay.
your chances of getting a redundant piece had doubled.
Right. Well, you had to get twice as many pieces with the concern of getting redundant line. So yes, by the time you got to the end, there was significantly more pieces that you already had than pieces. But so did they drop off of both sides, or was it only Caldari forces or only Gallente forces? Because it's worth noting that at the same time there were new rats roaming around and fighting each other, very reminiscent of like invasions, right? With the Triglavians and Edicom fighting each other, but it was Gallente and Caldari.
Yeah, so when the Gallente orders dropped, the Gallente NPCs started appearing in Athounon. They were in the smaller quantities in terms of like their fleet composition, and they rarely performed well. But contrary to rumored beliefs at the time, they did not drop items. Nobody corrected anyone on that. That was on the Kaldari side because we didn't want people shooting Kaldari only. We wanted them to go poke the Gallente too.
So
But it was
only
only
the Caldari were dropping it.
only the Kaldari ships were dropping items at the time.
Got it. Okay, that's a good point. Because yes, I remember that I even remember somebody commenting. It's like, well, then why is the Gallente stuff people dropping it too? And then like the rest of the conversation kind of went on with that idea as fact, which I was always kind of sus about. So thanks for that confirmation. So, so you have the hallway, you have the main room. But from my understanding, the probe footage came from a different way.
Yeah, so things dramatically slowed down once the command center footage was completed. It took a while before these relays that are Edencom property started decloaking in Athounon. There are 3 of them, and each one provides initially only provided a single footage piece, and then it gradually started providing more, so that we ended up with the 9 pieces that we ended up stitching together.
And that's the one that's like super remarkable, where you see the probe going down. Well, I thought there was first one where we only saw like a little bit, like the probe getting shot, but it wasn't clear enough. Isn't there 2 different videos of the probe, or am I wrong?
So the first video that we put out was of the first 3 pieces that were revealed. So
Ah,
after that was all from, I believe, one relay. Only one relay had spawned at the time. So it only provided a partial picture. And then once the other relays spawned, they provided the fuller picture that was then stitched together a second time and widened to show the full footage. And the footage is 3 sections basically, because each little section is about 10 seconds, maybe less. And then it cuts. It does a time jump to another portion later down the line in the recording.
right.
So it's skipping around.
Okay. So the first one, each chunk was like a chunk of the same video, right? Most of the chunks went the whole length of that particular video. But you're saying that this one came out in chunks that were like chunks of time too?
Yeah, so the first 2 footages that were dropped by the Kaldari, those were single clips, single time things. So you stitched all 12 together, and that was one thing. With this, it dropped the first relay dropped one piece from each time skip section of the Edencom drone footage.
Okay.
So we got one piece from each of those 3, and then once the other relay spawned, we got the other pieces.
Interesting. All right. And it all came together for the one that we've seen where it shows the mountains and then shows the drone going through the ravines. I'm trying to pull up it's funny because I put all of the stuff on my lore portal, but now I can't find which section I put it in. So, whoopsie. I think maybe I think I know where I. And then so once you've gotten all 3 of them decloaked, has anything happened since then?
After we managed to stitch together the full Edencom drone footage, nothing really has occurred in Athounon since. It's been really quiet. My belief is probably because the Galente Federation side was all hunkered down in Fliet's area, so there was no one really there to counter play off of.
Right. Yeah. The Galente, by and large, rather than seeing that as an opportunity to take it from the Caldari, they more saw it as an opportunity that, like, hey, some of the most dedicated and like hardcore RP dudes for the Caldari are sitting here in this one system trying to protect this area. We're going to attack a totally different place because that's not where they're going to be.
So in the first week after the males came in, both sides were fairly active, but the Caldari just way outnumbered the Galente. And the Galente tried to use carriers sparingly in an attempt to try and even out the odds. They dropped their own staging citadel in Alperina. They blew up a citadel that Tempest pilot was independently dropping nearby, and then so it was kind of back and forth. But by the end of the first week, a lot of the Galente assets in the area had already run dry.
Right.
They were trying to resupply anyone that was still fighting there, and a lot of people did start going down towards Fliet and Vergevinder, and because there was still pressure going on there from the farmers, which had already swapped to the Caldari side about 2 weeks prior.
Right. So I have the video footage. Let me just show. Here's the first one. Yeah. And this is, of course, ASMR, which, what does ASMR stand for?
Mature State Mountain Report.
There you go.
Found another body. Proceeding to the operations control center.
So we've talked about this before, but what they say is power grid disrupted. We see another body proceeding to the control center. And so then the second video
Achor
the
State
control
Mountain
center.
Report. Accurate news today. New footage of the boarding operations from Athounon has surfaced. Initially reported.
Who did you get to do your voice work, by the way?
I had a member of the 103rd do it, and he ended up leaving 103rd, but he was still doing some of my voice work. And I have a friend that was doing some other voice work. So it's just
Nice.
been those two so far. I am looking for other people. We're looking for people that want to do some narration, could do some video stuff. I'm recruiting.
All right. Well, if you too want to make fascist propaganda, you can go ahead and
Reported by the Capsuleer Organization, ARC.
That's not a
Viewer
nice thing to
discretion
say,
is
Ash.
advised.
Power grid disrupted. Emergency lights only.
No, this is the original.
Found another
No,
body.
it plays both.
Oh, okay.
Proceeding to the operations control center. Battle center. Some power here.
Some power here.
Seeing this?
So this thing right here, by the way, we haven't really done that too much of an. But I noticed this yesterday, that the thing off to the right that they're looking at when they say, "Are you seeing this?" Like, that looks like the front of a Kikimora, right? I'm not saying it is the front of a Kikimora, but it does suggest that this is very Triglavian in design.
Yes, I've heard that from a couple of other people that initially saw this video footage. Basically, it does look like it was reused Kikimora assets to create some sort of Triglavian object, though the purpose of it is completely unclear.
Right.
Looks like Commander's right.
Looks like Command was right. So this is showing the planet. I assume it's Athounon 5, and you can actually see. I think I think this is just a window. Yeah, this is a window, so you can see a MOA flying outside of the facility through the window at the same. All right, and then the final footage is
In a different video, yeah.
Yes. This is the most impressive one. So this is part 2. And this is part 3. That
Yeah, so each one is a little time skip.
each like flicker.
Yeah, if you take a close look at the HUD in the bottom left, it's giving the time. This was actually during the hunt, I believe.
YC114 0906. So
Yeah, the Edencom footage,
No, it's-
drone footage predates the decloaking incident by nearly
Correct.
a month.
15 days from the order. The order was 6/20. Yeah, 6/20. And this footage comes from 6:05. Yep. Nifty. Okay. And this is a very common thing with Eve storytelling, is that we'll often get things that are way out of sync, right? Like when we got Highland Tukas's message, it actually came from an event that happened like almost a year prior. Eventually timed it out, right? Dutch may know that. I know that the actual event, like supposedly, we had to go back and look at the history and see that months prior there was evidence of what happened, and that this was just finally we were receiving the footage from. You're right, Valamir. That was probably a ham eagle that was floating outside of the Ecom facility. That's totally true. Man, if they do put out like a missile eagle at this point, like how much of a
Dude,
All
it
right.
would be glorious.
All right. So what's the status right now? Like, could you go to Athounon right now and and kill rats and get these things?
So my understanding is it hasn't really progressed past this point. So you can still hostess the relays and get the clips from the drone footage. You can still kill Kaldari NPCs because that Reddit post you were looking at, he killed or looted
Right.
the wreck. So he's still getting video feeds from there, but I think they're all just the old ones currently.
So I guess one of the things that we can take from this is that if you want to get involved with this, you want to have your own set of these things, now's the time to get it, because here within another month or two, chances are we're going to move on to the next step, and those things might not ever be available again to collect in game. So there's that. I'm definitely not trying to convince people to go there and kill Kaldari. That's definitely not what I'm doing. It's funny because so I was talking about this the other day. I think it was on Twitter or something like that, and somebody responded with like, "Looks like we've got a Fed here." I'm like, "Do you not know who I am or what I do?"
Yeah. It is interesting to note that at one point during the first set dropping, the Galente NPCs and Kaldari NPCs actually got into a full-scale brawl near the Eden structure. There was actually multiple Galente waves coming in, and the Kaldari NPCs spawned ravens
Wow,
to deal with them, and they were just plopping them off from long range.
that's a good question. Is there any standings involved in all this? Do you get standings hits or gains by attacking either side?
I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I shot the Galente, but I do believe I took standing hits for shooting the Galente, but I can't be sure.
I offer 1 ISK for each video piece. These dead Kaldari are surely of no motivation. You're trying to convince people to go get killed by the Kaldari. I mean, you know, content's content.
I've seen the Kaldari NPCs kill people. Like they're not super powerful. They're not like fob diamonds, but they do hit, and they hit better than the Galente ones.
They're not diamond rats, but there is a lot of them. They operate as a fleet. Like this is basically the same kind of concept as invasions. Like this AI, the good news is that they probably behave with E-War the way that you would expect them to. In other words, like unlike normal, or like not normal, but like mission rats, how they can't be nuded out or whatever. The post invasion rats can. That's the good news. The bad news is that they operate like fleets, so they can
Yeah, so each little fleet group has 1 or 2 cruisers, and the frigates will actually orbit the cruiser until the cruiser is destroyed.
Right.
So they can't tackle very well if they're short range tackle.
Wait, hold on. Which one can't?
So because the frigates orbit the cruiser, sometimes they'll come into a close enough range if you're fighting at a closer range already to tackle you, but then they'll orbit around to the backside of the cruiser and fall out of range and break tackle.
Right. Yeah, I've actually noticed that too in several other instances with like these post invasion rats. Often they will have like a scram, but their default orbit distance is further than their scram range. So they'll scram you right away, but then once they get to their comfortable orbit, they'll tend to drop it. And it seems like that's intentional because I've talked to CCP about it before. They know that this happens and they do it. So I think that it's designed to kind of make it so that they sometimes let you go. And it's also more about your movement, right? Because it's now about what if you actually are moving towards them, then they're going to be close enough to be able to scram you.
Yeah, it could be that it's just trying to play more with game mechanics. It could also just be that sometimes they fit these ship rats, give them AI that aren't tailored specifically to that fit.
That's true. But well, that's what I mean by that is that like they have stats that
Talking
control
about
them.
fits, the Galente fits are really weird. Like you've got Molluses strapped out with every railgun and they can fit, and then they all have tracking paint, like target painters, for some reason.
Weird. Are they consistent with the Edencom version of the rats, or are they different?
No, the Kildari and the Galente diamonds used here are not the Edencom variants.
Okay. I wonder what they're built off of. Then they are post-invasion rats or not? Are they? So you said they're diamond or no?
They all have the diamond prefix, but
Okay.
they're not nearly as dangerous as
Right.
like fob or Sotoyo diamonds. You're looking more like mining blitz type diamonds is what these are, what I would compare them to.
That makes sense. And so I had a conversation with CCP Dragon during FanFest, and he actually like made a very illuminating question about that. He's asking, "Hey, when you see a diamond rat, what does that mean to you?" And we were having a discussion about whether or not diamond rat means super powerful or diamond rat means more advanced, pay better attention. And
Yeah,
I
the
think
diamond
that
terminology has become a lot grayer in the past few years
right.
because, there's no comparison between a diamond worm in a mining blitz site and a diamond Garussa's kestrel from a fob. There's just no
Right.
comparing them. They're completely different in terms of their threat level.
Yeah, and I think that from that discussion, I kind of took for that CCP is trying to use it in that latter mode where it's like, it's not necessarily saying that it's like Sancha rats are just nasty, right? Like power level wise. Diamond rats are more about how sophisticated they work, more than just them having overpowered stats. That makes sense. Right? Most of the time, the whole key with diamonds, even going back to the mining fleets, was the fact that they operated as a fleet, right? Not just the fact that they have individual high power, like the Sancha and the.
Yeah, I do feel like it might be time to do some cleanup work, at least with that. Because I have to explain the differences of how diamonds work to people every time they ask me what the hell a diamond is.
Yeah,
Because I'm like, well,
it's
are
not
you
well
talking
defined.
about one in like some kind of event site? Are you talking about fob ones? Like, what are you looking at? And then I have to be like, oh shit, you need to warp out immediately, or I'll be like, oh, that's okay, as long as you're not fit like an idiot, kind of thing. So
Right.
each one has different kinds of responses.
Right. And I think that this goes into the giant pile of things that CCP doesn't communicate effectively. Like, for instance, meta module naming nomenclatures. Right. There are lots of rules about how the game works and how things are named that are not explicitly explained, but CCP just kind of assumes that you'll figure it out or somebody will teach. But diamonds are one of those things that have always been kind of nebulous, and there always has been a sense of like disconnect between the way that the player base think about diamonds and the way that CCP thinks about them.
Yeah, because like the original versions were those fob ones and those mining fleet response units, and
Right.
those ones have always been way more dangerous. And then sometimes the event rats they're always diamonds, but sometimes they're way more dangerous than others. Like this past Union Day event site, they're not too bad. A lot of them are just alpha strikes. But then if you go and look back at let's see what the hunt ones, those ones are always a bit more nasty.
Right. And also, a lot of people's experience with diamonds would be like the diamond dreadnought studios.
Yeah, it's been pretty spectacular when a diamond Satoya shows up and just starts annihilating an entire system's infrastructure. You're like, what the fuck?
There are people in chat that are suggesting alternative ideas and comparing it to like WoW elites and stuff like that. I think that the big problem is that CCP hasn't always had a good definition of it. It really felt like it was like, well, we're trying to do something special, so we want to put something on there to warn people that it's not your average, bear. But then that nomenclature kind of continued to be applied to show that something's not their average bear. But what does it mean to not be your average bear has kind of mutated each iteration, right? The implementation of diamond rats in mining blitz had a very different thing that it was communicating than diamond rats in the mining belts, or that are mining in belts. The ones that are mining in the belts are trying to imply to you that like something, these are not your average mining drones or mining things. If you shoot it, something spooky will happen. Whereas in mining blitz sites, it's almost to communicate that the site itself is more advanced rather than the rats. But ever since then, it's been kind of all over the place with its actual implementation. Because there are
Yeah,
things that should, like, by that definition, there are things that have been released that absolutely should have been diamonds that aren't as well. So there's no consistency.
I would say if they were gonna do anything, I would change the symbolism for the fob and Sotoya rats at this point to some other kind of icon, because those are the two that you run into the most often that are distinctly different from the ones that keep showing up in events and stuff.
Right. I would actually go the opposite direction. I would remove the diamonds from basically everything besides the mining fleets.
I
Because
mean,
the whole
either
point of the mining
way,
fleet is to
one way or
communicate
the
that if
other,
you shoot the...
it works great. I think in terms of clarifying.
Right. But I mean, I think that the original intent of diamonds with like the mining fleets was that like if you shoot this hauler or this miner, you will get a response that is far more aggressive than you would have expected under normal conditions, right? This is not, it was to distinguish them from the miners and hauler NPCs that already existed that were roughly safe to shoot. But if you're on a fob, you know that the rats there are involved in that thing. You know, if you're in a mining blitz site, you know that the rats there are involved in that thing. I feel like it would be
Sort
much better
of.
if the diamonds
Fob
were to
rats do
call you
have a
to...
tendency to roam. They'll roam
Oh,
into
yeah, that's true.
belts. They'll roam onto citadel grids and bash citadels.
But then why don't Rasnaborg have diamonds by that lot?
I know. The funniest thing that don't think has happened yet is I don't know how many times you've run mining blitzes, but sometimes the normal belt rats will warp in.
Yes, that is funny. Because anytime you're mining anything can spawn belt rats. That's just the
So
rule, I think.
it's
For
rather
Wormhole.
curious. I'm wondering if we'll ever see someone mining in a blitz site see more diamonds warp in and not put two and two together that they're in a system that is a fob and fob rats have just showed up.
I do know that there is a thing when it comes to fighting the fob where you can accidentally trigger a different reaction for it, right? That the fob is designed to be balanced a certain way, but like I can't remember exactly what causes it, but like I think it's one of the haulers or whatever. Like if it's coming out
Yeah,
and you accidentally shoot it, it can trigger a totally separate reaction
so
on top.
basically the way fobs work nowadays is kind of murky because there's a lot of old information still running around. But the fob has a defense fleet, and the haulers have a defense fleet. So what happens is if the hauler shows up while you're bashing, it will summon its defense fleet simply for you being
Right.
on grid with it. And the fob also has two waves. It has a battleship wave usually, and then it also has a cruiser wave. They don't always spawn at the same time or one
Yeah,
before the other necessarily.
if I remember correctly, there's like 3 or 4 different kinds of reactions, and then it scales based on what you bring and
Yeah, it used
etc.
to scale on what you bring. I don't think it does quite anymore for the fobs. The Sotoyas do scales though still. But if you play your cards really badly, you could end up with 3 different defense fleets on your fob grid
Right.
while you're bashing it.
Now, I know that we had a fob group that was very active for a long time. I didn't do it nearly as much as I would like to, and get into it again, but I'm pretty sure it does escalate based on certain rules. Because I remember that we like brought in destroyers at a certain time because if you warp people in too late, then it would trigger a second response. But the whole point is that that other response had different combat capabilities. So while you could totally deal with the site if they brought in their fleet, the secondary response fleet, that it did damage that the main group doesn't do. I think with the Carissa's, I don't remember, but this is totally off topic. Let's go back to Athounon. Do you know anything about the Stargate that's being? Have you been tracking that at all?
Yeah, so I did get a tip off about the Kildari Stargate project before it was labeled as Stargate. So way on back, about somewhere around August, I got an Eve mail from someone who said they noticed a new landmark in Samanuni that was labeled Kaldari Stargate, or well, not Stargate project, but it was labeled construction site. So I went and took a look, and it started as a cargo rig with 3 jet cans around it, and I had seen those in hobo leaks before, so I knew it was new. It was actually genuine. It wasn't
Right.
something old that someone had noticed. And every now and then, a Navy Badger would warp from a Caldari Constructions logistics station and NPC station to the site, chill at the cargo rig, and then go back. And it stayed that way right up until right before Union Day, and that's when it started actually becoming a Caldari Stargate construction site.
Can I just say that I just think it's so cool that CCP puts little details like that in? Like we like to be dismissive of like the lore, how much CCP supports or whatever. But there are so many tiny little details that largely go unnoticed that shows that the universe is actually quote unquote do. I really like it. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it took me I didn't really I made a footnote of it in one of my forum news posts because it was just the cargo rig at the time, and I figured I'd hold on to my footage and wait until it grew before making a video on it. And then I pumped that video out during Union Day. It's the latest one. I don't know if you've seen it yet.
I don't think so. I could put it on if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about the Stargate project. I don't talk about the Galente one because the moment it was found was like while I was still finishing this, and I already had everything narrated, and I couldn't just go get more narration, so that kind of slipped under the rug, the Galente one, but it has the Caldari one.
And let me tell you, don't search for ASMR Eve on YouTube. I'm really glad that I wasn't streaming my browser window. Holy cow! All right, well, lessons learned there.
Yeah, you gotta enter the whole full name.
Yeah, I normally if I do the keyword in Eve Online, it helps, but every once in a while, because Eve is both a girl's name and New Year's Eve, it brings me to dramatically unexpected results. Either way,
Today.
let's go and play this.
Achur State Mountain Report. Accurate news today.
The Samanuni system has seen an increase in construction material imports as the Caldari state has begun a new Stargate construction project within the system. This development, however, has raised more questions than it answers. Samanuni, located in the Eokin constellation, is notable not only for being an Edencom fortress system, but also the Wyerkami system where current CEP chairman Akimaka Saraki earned statewide recognition for his defensive efforts against the Triglavian invasions only a few years ago. The construction site was initially spotted a month ago, thanks to a tip from Absolute Order pilot Zillion. Caldari Navy haulers were observed transferring materials from the Caldari Constructions Logistics Support Station in the system to a dead space cargo rig. In the past few days, however, the project has entered accelerated development. With the resources coming in from the efforts of the state military stockpile, the Stargate is already partially complete. The biggest question is, where is this Stargate meant to go? Independent analysis by Sayer Associates indicates that the gate's destination may likely be located in the Serthold constellation, a region of North Placid that has been a flashpoint between the Caldari State and Galante Federation in recent months following the discovery of the Edencom structure in Athounon over 3 months ago. The Athounon system and Serthold constellation continue to remain under the protection of Caldari security and Navy forces, in spite of the recent counteroffensive efforts by the Federal Defense Union elsewhere in Placid. These developments come as the Caldari State's National Workers' Union Day fast approaches, with celebrations already beginning across New Eden, including wargame simulations, state-sponsored mining expeditions, and parades. In addition to official state-sponsored events, independent Capsuleer events are also being earnestly planned. Event organizers are encouraged to reach out to Naomi Hakashi and Marion Teravin to facilitate timing and outreach for their events.
I think that's it. Yep, that's it. Cool. Really well done video, by the way. Really good use of footage. Looks very slick.
Really think that means a lot because I had to pump out the actual video production in like 2 hours.
Oh, trust me, I know. I know, like as you're putting it together, you're like, oh man, you see all the corners you're cutting, you see all this but let me tell you, as a person watching it, it looks really slick. I'm impressed. So yeah, what's interesting about that is that while a lot of basically people agree that the Caldari Stargate is pointed to the Athounon system, or at least the Surface constellation, it does not appear as if the Gallente one is.
I think Ark made a forum thread about the Gallente one and indicated that it too might be pointed in that direction, but it's not something I've seen as conclusively
We looked
stated.
at it and we could not. It did not look like it was pointing. In fact, the system that it looked like it was most pointed towards is actually the constellation that involves like Taki and Ugalis.
Oh, so you think it's pointed in that direction?
Yeah.
That could be.
Well, what's interesting, what's funny is the guy who was reporting it to me was like, it's pointing towards Stain. And so then I pulled up my map and I like lined up the whole thing, and because we were having a joke about the fact that like, oh, maybe they're invading the MR through the back door in Stain because of the star. Anyway, so we're but I then pull up the map and I line it up and I point it the other direction, and it basically pointed like within maybe 10 degrees of Intaki.
Yeah, the Gallente one doesn't have quite as obvious a direction.
Yeah. And I actually have some interesting theories about these Stargates and the previous Stargates and all that stuff when it comes to like the physics of Eve and all that, the relationship. But that's going to be a teaser. All right. Oh, Dutch Gunner has linked article by none other than Makoto Priano. Absolute legend.
We had a lot of fun having to try and keep her away from our Caldari NPCs.
I don't know. I'm not sure if I agree with you, but maybe. I'll have to look at it again. Maybe it's possible. I also didn't look at it 100% myself. It was like I was explaining it to somebody else, so it could very well be different, but because I was on the other side, I was looking around Intaki and all that stuff there. But
I do think it would be unusual to try and build yourself a Stargate aimed at a system that you can't build the other side for. So it could be in the Ugalis area because they recently retook that, the Gallente. So.
Right. Well, this actually brings me to a piece of my theory, which is kind of the wild part of it. I'll just say this. What's bothered me about this whole thing is that the Caldari one pointing to Athounon seems really relevant right this second, but like Athounon is not always going to be the thing, right? Like ostensibly other locations within the war zone will be relevant at different times. So why build this special new Stargate that goes to this one place when in a few months somewhere else is going to be the important part? And I wonder, hear me out, I wonder, because the Caldari Gallente war zone is much larger than the Amar Mimitar. What if they're making Stargates that can be redirected? Making it so that they can always point their Stargates at the front lines, giving players a way to go from high sec to the front lines at any given time.
It is a really compelling point, but at the same time, I'm not entirely sure any of the geography of the current war zones will be the same in 2 years. We could be seeing that this is going to Athounon, not just to get whatever is in the Edicom structure out, but it dramatically shakes up the Caldari to Placid connections. Like that suddenly becomes a very hot point between you only have 4 or 5 systems of low sec between Placid high sec and then Black Rise high sec.
Lorelite points out that realignable stargates have precedent within the lore. How's it going, Bobby? Which is absolutely true. In fact, in Eve Valkyrie, there's a whole thing about the fact that the Stargate that they're constructing is realigned at the last minute. So, however, it is worth noting that, like, previously, Stargates couldn't just be built willy-nilly. They had to be built in locations that were resonant with each other and gravitationally neutral, more or less, like a Lagrange point between two different stars or whatever. It seems that now that they have access to Triglavian technology, people are being able to make wormhole connections that weren't previously creatable, partially because of there's a doodad inside of the Celebex that suggests that they're basically using it to create the wormhole connection that would not normally have been able to be.
I will say the idea of being able to alter the geography of a war zone via the whole front line operations is interesting. We've never seen Stargates be as quite a big focal point for war, active plots. The idea that maybe we might be able to start destroying Stargates and controlling the geography of this area is a very interesting one that I wouldn't say is completely without merit anymore.
Lorelite also brings up that so it gets a little sticky. The canon involving the creation of Stargates is muddy. In the original lore article, which you can still find on the universe portal, it states that Stargates can only be created in binary star systems, which obviously there aren't a lot of binary star systems in Eve, and yet we have a lot of Stargates. And I believe it was CCP Falcon said, like back in the day at Vegas, that this was an unfortunate thing. Like the idea of the binary star system was created at the beginning, but then the technical limitations of once they started actually building the game, they couldn't make them into binary star systems, and so they didn't. But it's still kind of in the lore. But they're actually I found the other day that there's a newer article on Stargate technology that goes over a lot of the same stuff, but fudges it a little. It suggests that there are other period, like it could be a Lagrange point between a massive planet, or maybe two distant stars that happen to have a point where the gravitational forces balance each other out. So, but by and large, I mean, that is an up-to-date one. Couldn't Sancha help with creating wormhole? Again, I have a whole theory about this. I think next week I'm probably going to present it to everyone, and we'll talk about this. How wormholes are made and its relationship to all of this stuff, I think, is a big deal.
Oh, I just remembered something that is something of interest here. So, do you recall how in one of the World News posts, the Galente Federation president had ordered the FIO to investigate every storm planet in the Federation?
Yes. Yep, that was shortly after there was
I believe that was shortly after the Edencom footage was released.
No, I think it was before, because prior to the Edencom structure appearing, there was reports of arcologies being rumored to be on the storm planets in Athounon. And there was some fighting on a different planet on Athounon by Trig. So, and then it was after those ecologies were reported to be on those storm planets, I think, that Celis put out the order to investigate all of the storm. But this is actually something that has been...
Have you mapped out how many storm planets are in Galente Federation space?
I have not.
I remember some people were doing it, and it exceeded 500, I believe.
Oh, I don't doubt that at all.
Welcome to having 500 little places you might find something that isn't even something you can like select with your selected item menu. Because you can't
And
do
this
that
is,
with the Eden Tenshu either. You can't select it.
but people don't understand. People don't really realize that this how long this is kind of thing has been going on. I would say like they before even Invasions Chapter 3, there was already a whole thing because so I remember this distinctly because it really stood out to me. Um, one day I was doing a low sec roam. I think it was for the hunt, something, and I was staging in Fleet, and I just happened to see this group of like 15 Rasnaborg at a time in which we had never seen a group of Rasnaborg larger than 4, and we had never seen Rasnaborg in low sec. And when I went there, all of the Rasnaborg were just Rasnaborg Kikimora, Rasnaborg Demifix. No starving, no liminal, or no angling, nothing. Just straight up normal, or like no name. And that has also never been seen. And so like, but I remember at the time kind of being like, huh, that's unusual. And then at the end of the night during the roam, I thought, or I realized that we just roamed the entire night through Losec and we didn't see a single other fleet that was like that. So I stacked it away in my brain for a little while. And then like a week later, there was a world news article that was discovered that Fleet was one of the systems that the Triglavian experiments were happening on the storm planets of. This was prior to Chapter 3. This was during Invasions Chapter 1 and 2. There was an entire city that was everything living was kidnapped and all material was removed on a biological or molecular level. I can't remember exactly the word that they
Down
but
to
it was,
there.
say again?
Down to the molecular level.
That's what it was. And then they found that population on a storm planet that the Triglavians have basically, since invasion started, been attempting to perform biomutation and adaptation on humans in order to make them adaptable to extreme environments. So this is just kind of, in that sense, more of the same out of the trig.
Yeah, so I mean, there might be another piece to the whole Athounon Serthol kind of thing going on that we just haven't found yet, because there's so many objects you could warp to in these systems, and even if you go to them, you're not guaranteed to spot the thing you need to see if it's there.
Right. That's one of the things I think about a lot is that like I've lived in areas before I got into like the details of the lore or whatever. I've lived in low sec and stuff and seen places, but like if it wasn't a Plex, I didn't give a shit about it. And so like there are landmarks that are right there that I've never even paid attention to. And so what that means is that there could be a new landmark that's put in. People could live in the system that that landmark is in and just not notice it.
And like sometimes the things that you do find aren't necessarily anything. So like when that
That's true.
cargo rig, when the Stargate project was just a cargo rig, I had noticed that there were 2 Navy Condors on D-scan, and I had to get someone else to bring me a combat probe ship and probe for me. And we just found these 2 Condors out in the middle of nowhere. They were just sitting there, back to back. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. I'll bookmark this dead space spot and come back later. The next day, they were gone. And then the next time I checked, they were there again. And it seemed like, and then one time I descanned, saw them, went to the spot. They were at a different spot. And I haven't seen them since the Stargate project actually became a Stargate. So, I mean, were they a bug? Were they supposed to be there? Is it some sort of thing? I don't know.
That's
It's
always the
something we'll
fun
never
game,
get
right?
the answer to.
It's the meme, you know. Is this a bug? Like this happens all the time with Eve lore. I find is that often something will happen, and there will be a disagreement about whether or not what happened was what was intended to happen, right? Like one way or another. a good example of this was during the drifter attacks. The problem is that there were so many unusual things going on with the drifters, and at least a few of them were bugs. So then everything that the drifters were doing that seemed out of the ordinary were considered bugs. And so the line between what was a demonstration of the drifters' technological superiority and what were unintended bugs became blurred, and the player base became unable to differentiate between. And I think that this happens quite a bit, that intended behavior is written off as bugs, and maybe even bugs are interpreted as intended behavior. Although I would argue that that latter one is less problematic, because CCP can always go back and be like, actually, that bug is real. Imagine that.
Bug? You mean feature?
In fact, there is at least a pretty decent indicator signal from CCP last year, I think, that Caroline Star began as an actual bug.
How did they manage to do that?
I don't know, but it was like during one of the interviews, and they were talking about like one of the most impactful bugs in EVE Online, and they kind of hinted at, or they at least made a tease that
They made
Caroline
a joke
Star was
about
originally
boot.ini and then said the word
Oh, God.
Caroline Star, and everyone was like,
No, no.
what?
Well, they were talking about like the lore and all, like, so it was a bug that ended up becoming canonized, and the example that they gave was Caroline Star, which was, but they were like, I wonder if we should talk about this. Yeah, I mean, I'll look into it and find it. I don't know if I believe it, to be honest, but I guess it's one of those things. It was either intended or a very good example of CCP capitalizing on something in the moment. And the problem is that they're actually reasonably decent at both. So it's hard to tell. Yeah, Lauren says that he remembers that being said. Oh no, things don't act as they think they might in EVE. Yeah, it is disappointing to how often the player base sees something that behaves out of the way that they would expect, and expect that and just assume that it's wrong rather than their understanding is wrong. But I guess that this is kind of the human condition, right? So this is a human problem, not an EVE problem.
The amount of times where a CCP lore dev is actively engaged in the game, spawning stuff and causing things to happen on a daily basis, like, he can only do so much at any time by himself.
Right.
So a lot of the times people assume it's bugs because, oh, I'm the one that's special and gets to see the special thing happening, kind of thing. It's like, oh, please, kind of attitude.
Yeah, that caracal must just be a bug that's there. No, it was supposed to be there. You actually saw this person, this chronicle that's released in a year has that character. You saw that character, or whatever. I don't know. And meanwhile, in CCP headquarters, like, they know. I've always wondered, like, because players are always complaining about how CCP drops the ball or ignores the lore, all these weird comments. But I wonder how much CCP sits there in their headquarters and being like, oh my God, just get the thing. Like, just.
Oh, I guarantee it's all the dang time. Like, they're sitting there basically playing with the sandbox as if like they're gods. The
Right.
lore devs, like, they can spawn something and then they just sit there and wait, and they watch to see if anyone sees it, and no one says a word. They're like, oh, I bet he's thinking this. I bet he's thinking that. He's talking to his friends in his thing, and the dude didn't even notice it because he doesn't have it on his overview settings.
Right.
Like, that kind of stuff probably happens all the dang time.
Oh, yeah.
I guarantee that whoever set up the cargo rig initially didn't think anyone had noticed it for a while, maybe.
Maybe. And I mean, like I said, they keep teasing that there are things that we haven't found yet.
Yeah, and it's hard for them to be sure and like have a guarantee that we've done it, that we've seen it, that it's been revealed to the masses, because
we have some pretty decent methods to actually detect if we have, like, they know if we've been on grid with it ever.
Yeah, but I mean, they're not checking that all the dang time, maybe. But like, I do think it's important to note that every step in the Athounon arc that occurred after a video was made about it. It wasn't
Okay.
until
Yeah.
it had hit public media on the forums and YouTube that something happened next.
Hmm.
And that's
Interesting
why I
point.
was curious about why it took, about how long that cargo rig was there. The cargo rig was there for a month almost before it became anything else. So
Well-
it's always something in the back of my head where, like, if I had released video footage of the cargo rig on ASMR, would something have happened sooner?
And that's the reason why I tell that story about the Rasnaborg in Fliet, because that's something that happened that I've heard no one else basically talk about ever, right? That there were actually Rasnaborg doing things in the moment, in the lead up to invasions in space that were, noticeable. Because I actually did get, once I started talking about it, there was at least 2 or 3 other reports of these larger Rasnaborg. That was something that just happened, and CCP let it go by. And if it wasn't for just a couple of people like me, we would never even have that detail. I wonder how many other details are like that, especially when I go back in time and I look through the old stuff from back in the day. It's very clear that there were things that where people were playing around with. They maybe never quite figured out, maybe got abandoned, and now we don't even think about them because they're now so old or whatever. There's a lot out there to figure out and to see. Sure. My Lorelite says, "Oh, by the way, might want to update overviews. You want to give more detail about that? Has new items been added to the overview? This happens a lot. So this actually,
I think the overview now has settings for diamond faction warfare, like new NPCs.
oh, neat.
Yeah, I remember that showing up, and there was a lot of pings about that and Kildare militia discords. Make sure your overview is updated so you can see the Federation battleship diamond and the new sites or whatever.
And this is true for any time that there's a major update. So this is actually another thing that people complain about a lot. So I want to explain it real quick. Whenever CCP adds a new thing to your overview, if you already have an account, you already have your setup done, it will not be on your overview by default. So anytime anything new is added to the game, you should always check out your overview to see whether or not there's new things for you to check. Now, why don't CCP just add it? Well, this is because your overview settings are saved locally. And your overview settings are like what you show on your overview is saved as a comma delimited list of things to show. So it doesn't show it doesn't have a list of every single item and whether or not you're showing it. It just has a list of things to show. So if they add a new item, there's no reason why your list of things to show would have that item on it. Therefore, you have to manually add it to your overview yourself because CCP can't add it for you. It's your local file. They could, in theory, make a whole thing that writes to your own overview every single time they add something new. But A, that
I think
could
what
get
they should
complicated.
do.
B, that could get boot.ini and whatever. But I think it's just easier this way.
I think what they should do is add a UI element to the overview settings now that they've got their whole photon thing going on, and just do what they've done that pissed everyone off with the item menu. Add a red dot for every new thing. Like it shows up beside it, and so that way you can go check, because I seriously doubt anyone memorizes what
We at Eve
is
Universe
going
do not
on.
condone red dots or suggesting that they should add red dots. Same.
But that way you could tell if something was new or not on your overview settings, and
So
click it.
there's now a construction platform which has a whole new icon, which is pretty nuts. Destructible effects
Is
beacon
that
is like
sci-fi or is that new?
Lorelei, this is on Trank, right? And then industrial support facility, logo display monument. Okay, those probably are already exist. Yeah,
I
this is
think
on
those are
Trank.
the ones that show up on at landmarks.
And then station conversion monuments, station improvement platform, station upgrade platform, and super weapon beacon.
Interesting.
Okay.
That is very interesting. I haven't noticed that stuff before.
I don't like super weapons being brought in right when the Amar are starting to mine Isogen 5. This is not great.
Edencom based Dreadnought or Titan with a super weapon.
My headset's dying, so I should probably be wrapping things up soon.
Rip.
Oh man, that's yeah. Sorum issued Abaddon. Yeah, well. Anywho, but before I wrap things up, is there anything else that we want to talk about? Maybe I could make it work, but
Someone on my my ASMR Discord pulled up a scope article that's a bit older, from the Liberation Games, and they say that the Pegaler and Amavinic constellations are under Triglavian subversion threat after Cirthal.
right. Yep, I remember that.
Hmm.
Like I said, there was a lot of little things that were building up in that area, but they were all just like tangential headlines in world news for a few ports. Like I said, there was reports of fighting on one of the planets. There was reports of rumors of arcology found on one of the storm planets. You know, all kinds of stuff. And then, of course, it kicks off with the. I did nothing wrong in Pegaler. I don't know if you were here at the very beginning, Lorelite, but I did talk about that. You were a good example that I brought up about like literally creating lore out of nothing.
One day, Lorelite's gonna wake up and log in, and CCP's dumped an orbital ring over her planet.
Lorelite's formal title is "She Who Corrects Axtarothi." Pretty much, I can't say anything without her being. Actually. I'm okay with that, though. I appreciate the new one. All right. I think my headset is going to die very, very soon, so I won't be able to hear the other people. Discord. So I think I'm going to just... accountability does make me more credible. Exactly. I often say that I do what I do. I speak my thoughts out loud such that they can be corrected, right? Like, I say what's in my head out loud and loudly, so that way, if they require correction, somebody will go around and do. Is actually an in-game corporation?